Let me invite you to look in your workbook to Session 3, Genogram Your Family. A genogram is a visual tool to help us look at the history and dynamics of our family over 3 to 4 generations and its impact on us. The purpose of this skill is to help you become aware and to break the sinful patterns in your family of origin in order to live your God-given purpose in the world. This skill applies 2 biblical truths. The first is that the blessings and sins of our families have impact, lasting for at least 3 to 4 generations. That means that your family, in the biblical sense, includes all your brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-uncles and aunts, and significant others going back to the mid-1800s. And so we see scriptures such as when God speaks the 10 Commandments, and he says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation," Exodus 20. The Hebrew word for punish can best be translated in English as tends to be repeated. In other words, what happens in one generation often repeats itself in the next. The consequences of actions and decisions taken in one generation affect those who follow. So our pasts are played out in our present relationships without us necessarily being aware of it. For this reason, we often observe certain patterns from one generation to the next, such as divorce, addictive behaviors, inability to feel certain emotions, sexual abuse, poverty, depression, and unstable relationships. As has been said, we may be through with the past, but the past is not through with us. The second principle is, becoming a Christian is to be birthed into a new family and a new culture. When we come to Christ, we are birthed and adopted into God's family. We then have new brothers and sisters from around the world. We are given a new name, Christian, a new inheritance, and a new power, the Holy Spirit. What determines our identity is no longer first our biological blood, but the blood of Jesus. Discipleship then involves looking at the impact of my family of origin and history and put off that which does not belong in the new family of Jesus. And then we learn to do life in Jesus' family. This is hard work and often painful. We like to say, Jesus may be in your heart, but Grandpa lives in your bones. But the extent to which we can go back and understand how our families have shaped us will determine our ability to break destructive patterns. The goal then of the genogram is to actually help us do just that. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s, already 17 years as a Christian, that I realized the impact of my family. Here are 3 messages I received from them. First, you exist to keep everyone else happy. Along with my brothers, our role was to make Mama happy. My dad traveled a lot and was absent, and my mom suffered from mental illness her whole life. Even though we were children, it was expected that we would take care of her. So when I became a Christian, I naturally began to take care of other people. I simply transferred being overly responsible in my family of origin to being overly responsible for everybody. Is it any wonder I became a pastor? A second message was, you don't have a right to enjoy your life. My family didn't do play or delight. Because there was physical and emotional abuse, healthy boundaries were not in place. I would allow people to treat me poorly. It felt normal. In fact, in my family, we were expected to work and produce, not do self-care or have fun. So I felt guilty resting and being unproductive, and I worked all the time. And I naturally brought that then into my Christian life. And a third message out of my family was, it's not okay to make mistakes. In my house, if you dropped a dish and it broke, you got a beating. There was an unhealthy perfectionism that got into me as a result, one that I carried into my Christian life. So I believed in the free love and grace of God, but I lived law, as if God's love for me was based on working hard and being perfect.
I was one of 7 children, and my family gave me many wonderful gifts growing up. I knew I was loved. I belonged to a large extended family of aunts, uncles, and cousins. My family knew how to play together, celebrate, and were still very loyal and supportive of one another. In fact, my family had so many positive traits that it was difficult for me to even admit that we had negative ones. But we did. And those negative traits impacted my capacity to love others well in significant ways. The first was in the area of emotions. My family was good at positive emotions such as joy, enthusiasm, and fun, But we weren't good at feelings like sadness, hurt, or fear. In other words, we didn't do the difficult emotions. I remember my father teaching me to ride a bike at 6 years old. When I crashed to the ground and was laying there with a bleeding elbow and knee, my father says to me, "Get up, you're not hurt." But I remember laying there thinking, no, I am hurt. But since he said get up, I got up. Because my father could not enter his own hurts and fears, he could not enter mine either. I had to learn to become a whole human being who could feel and acknowledge all of my emotions. Secondly, we didn't do conflict well either. The mantra in my family of 9 was, don't fight. The problem was we were not taught how to negotiate our differences. My parents' conflicts either ended in yelling or silent treatment, both of which were scary to me as a child. I brought these styles of conflict into the new family of Jesus. If I saw you at church and was mad at you, I would avoid you. If we disagreed, I just assumed I was right and you were wrong. I had to learn not to be threatened by differences, but to respect them. Thirdly, social shame was a part of my family. It was important to us to be seen by others as good. This meant be moral, be nice, don't upset or disappoint people. This led me to say yes a lot, even when I really wanted to say no, lest I upset or disappoint people. I also didn't speak up in conversations when I disagreed with what was being said because I didn't want to be seen as disagreeable, even though I was. I had internalized that my worth and value, that is my sense of okayness, came from how others thought of me.
Now turn to the page in your workbook with your genogram graphic on it. And I will lead you in sketching out a 3-generational genogram to look at patterns in your family. We will do a simple genogram here, meant to serve as an introduction. We're only going to be giving you a brief time. The goal is not to get all the symbols perfect. People take graduate level courses in this, but to become aware of unhealthy patterns from our family of origin that are holding us back from maturing and growing as God intends. So let's begin. As you look at the paper, you will notice boxes and circles. The box is a symbol for male, the circle for female. Next to the bottom box on the left, write the name of your father or primary caregiver if you were adopted. Next to the bottom circle on the right, write the name of your mom or primary caregiver. Don't worry about divorces yet or blended families, half-brothers or sisters. We will get to that. Notice now the line going up from your father to your grandparents on his side. Write their names next to the box and circle. Now write the name of your grandfather on your mother's side in the box on the left and the name of your grandmother on your mother's side in the far right. If you don't know their names, simply put a question mark next to the box or circle. Now, under the line that connects your parents, we are going to add you and any brothers and sisters you have. You're going to draw a line down for you and your siblings. You'll be going from left to right with the oldest to the left, moving to the youngest on the right. So you can see I have an older sister, Gloria, an older brother, Joe, and another older brother, Anthony. And then I'm the youngest. And my line goes the longest, and it says Peter. Now, as you draw lines down, make sure your line extends longer than the others, since you are the star of your genogram. Write the names of each one next to the appropriate box or circle. Now we have 3 generations showing in the diagram. Next, if you are married or were ever married, you will note that with a line running from you to your spouse as you see on your screen. Then draw lines down for any children that come from that marriage and write their names. Or if you are living together with an intimate other but not married, use a dotted line to signify that. You can see that symbol in the box below that says relationship status symbols. Let's assume my parents divorced. We would draw two slashed lines on their marriage line, as you see on the screen. If they only separated, you would put one slashed line. Then if my father remarried or lived with someone else for a length of time, I would draw a line going to the left of him with a circle for the woman, as you see on the screen, and I would note her name. And if they had any children, a line is drawn down from them. Again, write their names. Let's say you divorced and now you are remarried. It would look like this. Finally, for people who have died, we mark it with an X in the box or circle. Now, if anyone died prematurely, note next to their box or circle at what age did they die and how. For example, accident, cancer, suicide. Now you have a 3 to 4 generational diagram in front of you. Now I'm going to explain some other important additions to your genogram. As I'm speaking, I want you to listen as I lead you through the section called Individual Activity, with numbers 1 to 4 in your workbook. At the same time as I'm speaking, feel free to fill out some of the answers, but we will be giving you time alone after I finish so you can complete filling it out. We're often asked, why are we focused on the negative legacies and not the positive ones? The answer is time. And it is the negative ones that keep us from going forward, and we tend to want to avoid those. 99% of our parents did better than their parents, but it's important that we courageously look at what is true. Now we want to begin to describe the relationships between family members. You will notice in the chart 5 relationship dynamics with descriptions and corresponding symbols for each one. Here are some examples of how I would describe the relationship dynamics that went on in my family. When I think about the relationship between my parents growing up, there was a recurring theme of conflict. See the symbol. Some of us will have lots of conflict lines in our genogram. My father had a cutoff for years with my older brother. They stopped talking to each other for years. See the symbol. I had a distant relationship with my sister for years. This means we were not emotionally connected. We didn't share beyond surface information. Note that symbol. Enmeshment is when there's pressure for family members to think, feel, or act alike. This is common in many families. See my father with his mother. For example, enmeshment is you have to be at a certain family event or your family will be upset with you. Then there's abuse. And abuse can be sexual, physical, or emotional. This is important to note in any family genogram. I realize it's painful to note, but it's very important. We see that in my grandfather with my mother and his wife. Again, note the symbol. Now look at the second question in your workbook. I want you to think about reoccurring themes that run in your family, such as divorces, affairs, secrets, addictions. See that box on the right side of your genogram sheet. A few themes in my family were cutoffs, overworking, and abandonment. Again, note those in the box provided. Question 3 will ask you to note any earthquake events. These are traumatic events that impacted your family that sent shock waves through your family generationally, perhaps even before you were born. In my case, I had a cousin born with Down syndrome about the same time I was born. One of my brothers joined a cult, and I had a first cousin killed in the Vietnam War in 1968. And then finally, as your time comes to a close, you'll answer question 4. What are 1 or 2 insights you have learned regarding how your family of origin impacted who you are today? So now you can turn to your workbooks and follow the instructions given. For many of us, to genogram our family was very difficult to do. We commend you for your courage. The story of the Israelites coming out of slavery in Egypt is a great picture for us. They lived for 400 years as slaves. They had other gods, they lied, they stole, they coveted, they worked 7 days a week. Although God had delivered them out of Egypt, Egypt was still deep in them. They were freed by grace, but they still had their family's ways of doing life in their bones. They had to be formed now as God's new family. So God gave them the 10 Commandments. In the same way, God gives us Scripture. We call this the work of discipleship. That is why it is so important that we become deeply aware of the commandments of our family. Most were never spoken, but they are in us. The principle is you cannot change what you are unaware of. So look in the workbook and consider the sample of family commandments. We chose 10 very common ones. For example, look at the first commandment on money. Some of us were taught things like money is the best source of security. The more money you have, the more important you are. Or make lots of money to prove you made it. I know a young man named Stephen who found himself in almost $30,000 of debt. Overwhelmed and frustrated, he looked at the largeness of what was ahead of him. I invited him to do a brief genogram of how his family handled finances. So I asked him a simple question: how were finances handled in your family? We sketched out a 3-generational genogram looking at how his grandparents and his parents dealt with money. The pattern was unmistakable. There was debt, mismanagement of money, and many financial struggles. This awareness took him on a journey to change that legacy.
Let's look at the commandment of anger. How'd your family do anger? Was there only one person who was allowed to be angry? Did your family stuff anger, then explode, or leak it out in sarcasm? Was anger dangerous or suppressed? We had a husband share with us a story about his wife who would lash out at him and verbally attack him. I asked John if he had anger toward his wife when this happened. "Oh no," he said, "I'm not allowed to get angry with her. She's only allowed to be angry with me." The story then spilled out that John grew up with an alcoholic father who took his anger out on the family, but the family was never allowed to be angry with him. John had an internal rule that said, it's not safe ever to show my anger. So he was allowing his wife to disrespect him rather than assert himself. The question is, how do we do anger in the new family of Jesus? God says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. He also says, be angry, but don't sin. God has given us our anger to assert ourselves, not attack others, especially when we are being disrespected. Let's look at the commandment of grief and loss. How did your family do grieving? When I was in the 2nd grade, my grandfather died. I have an indelible memory of coming upon my mother in my grandparents' basement. She quickly turned her head so I would not see her crying. As a 7-year-old, I can still remember the jolt of fear in my body because 1, I had never seen my mother cry, and 2, because there was something happening that I wasn't supposed to be seeing. And this would be just one of many messages from my family where I internalized that showing sadness or weakness must be bad. My mother didn't know how to grieve because her family didn't know how to grieve. When she was 9, her sister, just 1 year younger than her, died. It's very traumatic for a child to lose a sibling. Her parents did not know how to talk about that tremendous pain of that loss with their children, and they turned to alcohol instead. But what does God say about grief and loss? Well, it's such a significant part of life that 2/3 of the Psalms are about grief. And we have a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations on grieving. Since life is filled with losses from birth to the grave, it's essential that as members of the new family of Jesus, we acknowledge our losses. God uses our losses to meet us in ways we had never imagined. Now, please turn to your workbooks and follow the instructions.
Your homework for the next week or two is to observe your behavior. If something seems out of order in your life, ask yourself, how did my family do that? There are many layers of doing a genogram. It can be a shock for some to do this for the first time. I spent 1 full year in an advanced program interviewing every living member of my family to build my genogram. The purpose was to see how it has impacted me in the present. It was very painful, but powerful and liberating. Some of you may be fragile right now. God had a certain level of awareness that He wanted to bring to you today. Let me encourage you to, number one, prayerfully reflect on your genogram in this coming week. Sit with your genogram before God in prayer. Give God time to clarify things for you, perhaps even make some additional connections. Secondly, some of you may want to sit with a wise mentor or friend to talk through your genogram and get some additional perspective. And thirdly, others of you may see the value of meeting with a good Christian counselor or therapist for some healing of deeper wounds. For me, this was indispensable for my own process. Every family is broken. Some are very deeply broken, as mine was. So was Joseph's, one of the primary figures in the book of Genesis. He experienced great loss and tragedy in his family growing up. His losses were enormous. He could have said, "My family ruined my life. They robbed me of my best years." But instead, he remained faithful to God and walked with Him, even when things were externally going terrible for him. He had a deep sense that the purposes of God were at work in hidden and mysterious ways. And in the end, Joseph was profoundly transformed and became a blessing to the nations. God has placed you in your family at a particular moment in history, into a particular set of circumstances, in a particular place. He did that to shape you into a person that, like Joseph, might be a blessing to the world around you. Here is the great truth. God works in, through, and in spite of your family and your past. This is the entire lesson of the book of Genesis. The purposes of God are at work in hidden and mysterious ways. God is working out His purpose through and in spite of the traumas we experience. Joseph does not deny his painful past, but weeps over his losses. And he stays with God. He knows people may have planned this for evil, but God has planned it for good. God has placed you on earth for a purpose, to bless you and that you might be a blessing to others. I love the phrase, the invisibility of God in human affairs. God has been at work in your life from the time you were in your mother's womb, and He wants to take your past and give you a great future out of it. God will waste nothing. In fact, when we surrender ourselves to God, we find that some of our best material is found in the failures and pain of our past. So let me invite you again this week to dig into the daily office, Emotionally Healthy Relationships Day by Day. You'll be in week 3, and a number of the devotional readings will directly speak to issues related to Genogram Your Family. And as you cultivate your own personal relationship with Jesus, you'll be better able to put off any false messages you receive from your family of origin, and you will experience more deeply God's message to you, that you are loved and you are lovable. You have nothing left to prove. So may you be like Joseph, who stayed with God through good times and bad, and may you trust Him to take all the broken parts of your history and create something beautiful with your life so that you can offer that to the world.